What if your poverty has nothing to do with money, but with memory? Most people think being broke is about bad luck, bad timing, or bad choices. But Carl Jung believed there's something far more ancient controlling your reality, a force living inside the mind that shapes what you allow yourself to have. He called it a complex, a cluster of emotion, memory, and instinct that forms when the psyche is overwhelmed, a living fragment of the unconscious with its own will. And one of the most powerful of all is the poverty complex, the invisible program that keeps you broke, even when you think you're trying to get rich. Jung wrote that a child doesn't grow up. They simply layer adulthood over the wounds of their youth. Everything you believe about money was learned long before you ever touched it. When you were small, you watched how your parents reacted to money. You felt the tension when bills arrived. You absorbed every sigh, every silence, every argument about not enough. And the child in you didn't just witness it, it became it. The unconscious translated those emotions into unspoken laws. Wanting more causes pain. Having too much means losing love. It's safer to need less. You didn't choose these beliefs, they were imprinted, and now decades later you still live by them without even knowing. You call it humility. You call it being realistic. But your psyche calls it safety. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." When it comes to money, that fate becomes a repeating story. Different jobs, same struggle, different opportunities, same anxiety, because the same hidden emotion is still writing the script. That emotion is fear. The fear of having and the fear of losing. The fear of being seen as selfish, greedy, or undeserving. The fear that having more means you'll be alone. Your conscious mind says, "I want wealth," but your unconscious whispers, "Wealth is danger." And the unconscious always wins. To Jung, money was never just a practical thing, though it was symbolic energy. It represented life force, possibility, power. And just like energy, it obeys psychological laws. If you associate money with guilt, it repels you. If you associate it with fear, it hides. If you associate it with love, it flows. You're not struggling with economics. You're struggling with emotion. Think back. If your father ever said, "We can't afford that," if your mother ever cried while paying bills, if you ever felt that wanting something made you a burden, then your nervous system learned to equate desire with danger. So as an adult, every time you desire something, you unconsciously sabotage it. Not because you're lazy, but because the child in you still believes safety lives in lack. That child is loyal, painfully loyal, to the emotional truth it once knew. And so your adult life becomes an endless echo of that memory. Jung believed that what we call self-sabotage is really the unconscious protecting the ego from psychic pain. It's not against you, it's trying to keep you safe. But safety and growth cannot coexist. The same pattern that kept you alive is now keeping you small. This is the paradox of the poverty complex. You are not afraid of money. You are afraid of what money might change in you. Afraid that success might isolate you, afraid that freedom might destroy your connection to love. And so unconsciously, you choose to remain broke, not out of failure but out of fidelity. Fidelity to the child who survived. Let's make this real. You work hard, but when the opportunity comes to raise your price, you freeze. You receive a bonus and suddenly an unexpected expense appears. You pay off debt only to start a new one. That's not random. That's ritual. The psyche returning to its emotional equilibrium and its comfort zone because the unconscious behaves like a thermostat. When life gets too good, it lowers the temperature to what feels normal again. That's why people can't sustain abundance they don't feel worthy of. The unconscious protects identity, not potential. Jung called this phenomenon psychic compensation. When one part of the psyche grows too far, another side pulls it back to balance. If you grow too ambitious without inner harmony, the unconscious compensates by creating obstacles, not to punish you, to restore wholeness. This is why no financial plan works without psychological integration. You can learn every strategy, but if your unconscious still associates wealth with danger, it will undo you quietly. So how do you begin to break the spell? You start by asking the simplest and hardest question. When did I first learn that having less made me safe? Find that memory. You'll feel it before you see it. Maybe it's a dinner table argument, a sigh, a slammed door, a moment of shame when you wanted something and were told you couldn't. That's where your poverty complex was born. Not from numbers, but from emotion. Until you face that emotion, the story repeats. To Jung, healing doesn't come from suppression, but from integration. He said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That darkness is your inherited fear of wealth, of power, of self-worth. And the moment you name it, it begins to lose control. Because consciousness is the solvent that dissolves all complexes. You've been taught to chase wealth. But Jung would tell you, you don't chase symbols, you unite with them. Money is just a mirror. When you stop fearing what it reflects, you stop repelling it. The path to abundance doesn't begin in the world. It begins in the psyche. We often think money is just a neutral tool, but in Jung's world, nothing that carries emotion is neutral. Everything charged with desire or fear becomes symbolic, alive, and when something becomes alive in the psyche, it can possess you. That possession is what Jung called a complex in autonomy, a piece of the mind that acts like a small, independent personality. When your relationship with money is ruled by fear or guilt, the complex takes control. You become the instrument of your own repression. The shadow begins to speak. When you start to succeed, do you feel a strange discomfort? A voice saying you're being greedy or don't get ahead of yourself? That voice isn't reason, it's memory. It's the shadow of scarcity rising to restore the old balance. Jung wrote that every light casts a shadow. The moment you bring money into the light of awareness, the unconscious shows its opposite. If you want abundance, you must face the part of you that despises abundance. If you want freedom, you must meet the part that clings to control. The shadow of scarcity isn't evil, it's terrified. It learned that wanting more once caused pain, the loss of love, the tension in the house, the disapproval of others. So it decided wanting was dangerous. Now, whenever you desire expansion, it floods you with guilt. You think you're moral, but you're really terrified of abandonment. The inherited fear. You didn't invent your scarcity. You inherited it. Jung said that the psyche is not born blank, it's born ancient. Inside you live the emotions, instincts, and unresolved histories of your lineage. If your ancestors survived war, hunger, or debt, that emotional code passed down through behavior, silence, and story. Your grandmother who hid cash in jars. Your father who said, "Money changes people." Your mother who worked endlessly but apologized for wanting rest. Their stories became your psychic DNA. You're not just living your life, you're finishing theirs. The unconscious doesn't care about time. It keeps replaying the same emotional movie until someone changes the ending. That someone is you. The guilt of expansion. Notice what happens when you begin to rise. You make more money and suddenly feel heavy, restless, guilty, uncomfortable. It's as if you've done something wrong. That guilt isn't rational. It's ancestral loyalty. The unconscious says, stay where we've always been, don't outgrow us. Jung observed that the child often bears the unlived life of their parents. When you surpass what your parents achieved, the shadow interprets it as betrayal. You don't want to leave them behind emotionally, so you self-sabotage to stay equal. But loyalty to pain is not love. You honor them not by repeating their struggle, but by transcending it. When you grow, you don't dishonor your family. You redeem them, you prove the story can end differently. The archetype of poverty. In myths across civilizations, there is always a figure of poverty, the beggar, the humble wanderer, the saint who owns nothing. Jung saw these as archetypes, psychic patterns that express eternal truths. The poverty archetype teaches humility and gratitude, but when over-identified, it becomes self-punishment. You begin to worship smallness, confusing it with virtue. You believe struggle is holy, that suffering purifies the soul. But Jung warned, when a symbol becomes literal, it becomes dangerous. You were never meant to become the beggar. You were meant to integrate his wisdom, to value simplicity without rejecting abundance. The psyche seeks balance, not extremes. True humility is knowing you are worthy of more, yet not ruled by it. True wealth is freedom from both greed and guilt. The cycle of avoidance. How many times have you said, money isn't that important? You say it to sound evolved, but secretly it's fear speaking. Because if money doesn't matter, you never have to face the pain it carries. Avoidance feels spiritual. But in Jungian terms, it's repression wearing a halo. You avoid checking your account. You avoid asking for payment. You avoid receiving praise. And each avoidance feeds the complex, making it stronger. The unconscious loves what is ignored. Whatever you won't face, it controls. The mirror of envy. When you see someone living freely, creating abundance, something stirs in you, an envy. But envy isn't proof that you're bad. It's proof that a part of you wants to evolve. Jung would say envy is a signal from the shadow. There's energy here you haven't claimed. Instead of judging that person, ask, what part of me do they represent? Usually it's confidence, freedom, permission, qualities you buried under humility and fear. Integrate the envy, turn it into inspiration. Because the only difference between you and them is that they stopped apologizing for existing. The false morality of scarcity. The poverty complex hides behind morality. It says, I'm a good person because I don't care about money. But Jung would call that a shadow inversion. When we turn our repression into pride, it's not moral to shrink. It's tragic. When you deny your capacity to receive, you deny life's flow itself. You refuse to be a vessel for energy, whether that energy is love, creativity, or wealth. Money is not evil. It's a mirror. If you see corruption, look at the reflection, not the mirror. The unconscious projects its shadow outward. That's why people who hate the rich often behave like tyrants in their own small kingdoms, controlling, bitter, afraid. The same energy they condemn is trying to be lived through them. To integrate the shadow of scarcity, you must admit that you desire more, not because you're greedy, but because growth is natural. Every cell expands. Every tree reaches for light. You are no different. The collective spell. We live in a world ruled by the collective poverty complex. Society glorifies exhaustion and calls it productivity. We sacrifice joy for validation, time for appearances, peace for performance. We worship scarcity as proof of virtue. I work harder, therefore I deserve more. But the unconscious doesn't care about slogans. It sees the contradiction, a species capable of abundance choosing starvation, physical, emotional, spiritual. Jung predicted this. He said the modern world would lose its soul and try to replace it with consumption, and yet the hunger would remain, because what we crave isn't more things, but more meaning. The more we chase external wealth, the poorer the inner world becomes, until we remember money is a servant, not a savior. The turning point. There comes a moment when the old story collapses. You realize the fight with money was never about bills or numbers. It was about worth. You feel the exhaustion of carrying generations of fear, and something inside whispers, enough. That whisper is yourself, the central archetype of wholeness Jung described. It calls you to stop identifying with the wounded child, the guilty adult, the ancestral echo. It invites you to step into authorship. This is the moment alchemists called nigredo, the black phase of death before gold. Your old self dissolves, your illusions burn, and in that darkness a new awareness glows. You see that the mind keeping you broke isn't evil, it's outdated software. You thank it for its service, and then you upgrade. The alchemy of acceptance transformation isn't a fight, it's heat, pressure, time. When you stop blaming and start feeling, the fire begins. You re-experience the shame of childhood, the guilt of success, the fear of rejection, but this time you don't run, you witness it. That witnessing is the philosopher's stone of psychology. Because what you observe consciously, you no longer repeat unconsciously. In that moment, money stops being an enemy. It becomes energy again, neutral, powerful, ready to serve. You can't think your way out of scarcity. You must feel your way through it. Because what logic calls lack, the unconscious calls protection. The mind that keeps you broke isn't stupid. It's scared. And fear can only dissolve through awareness and experience. Jung believed that every wound hides a god, a piece of energy so powerful that, when integrated, becomes your strength. Your fear of wealth hides the archetype of abundance. Your guilt hides worthiness. Your envy hides desire. Each shadowed emotion is gold waiting to be purified. That purification is not glamorous. It's the work of the inner alchemist. Stage 1. Awareness. The first step in Jungian transformation is awareness, to observe your automatic reactions without judgment. Watch how you flinch when someone mentions money. Watch how you minimize your achievements. Watch how you overgive, then resent it. Each reaction is a doorway. When you notice, the spell weakens. Because what is seen no longer controls you from the dark. Write your story. Describe what money meant in your childhood home, what was spoken, what was felt, what was forbidden. Those moments hold the blueprint of your financial identity, and you can't rewrite a story you refuse to read. Stage 2. Acceptance. The second step is radical acceptance. Not passive but powerful acceptance. The kind that says, yes, this is what my unconscious created to keep me safe. You cannot transcend what you still condemn. When you feel guilt for wanting more, don't push it away. Hold it. Ask it what it's protecting. You'll hear something like, if I grow, they'll leave me. Or, if I shine, I'll be hated. That's your inner child speaking. And Jung would tell you, the task is not to silence the child, but to parent it, to become the adult presence that says, you are safe now. We can have more and still be loved. That sentence, repeated with presence, rewires centuries of fear. Stage 3. Alignment awareness sees. Acceptance softens. Alignment acts. The psyche doesn't evolve through thought. It evolves through embodiment. You teach your unconscious safety by acting safely in situations that once triggered danger. You start saying no when you mean no. You ask for your worth without apology. You keep the money you earn. You stop overgiving to earn love. Each action teaches the nervous system a new equation. Having does not equal danger. Success does not equal isolation. Abundance can coexist with love. That's integration, the meeting of opposites, where consciousness and the unconscious become one flow. The symbol of gold. To Jung, gold in alchemy was not wealth, it was wholeness. The alchemists melted base metals in fire, just as the psyche melts false identities in suffering. When the ego burns, the self is revealed. And the self, the divine center within, knows abundance as its natural state. Gold was a metaphor for integration, turning pain into purpose, fear into power, guilt into gratitude. You don't manifest gold, you become it. That's the real secret Jung discovered. Abundance is not achieved, it's remembered. It was never outside you. It was hidden beneath shame, guilt, and fear. When you uncover it, money stops being a goal and becomes a reflection of that wholeness. The end of the war. There's a point where the battle with scarcity ends, not because you've won, but because you've understood. You stop hustling to prove worth. You stop avoiding numbers. You stop living in reaction to fear. And something subtle happens. Synchronicity. Opportunities appear not from force, but from flow. People who resonate with your new energy arrive. Ideas, invitations, chances. The outer world begins to match the inner transformation. It feels like magic, but Jung would say it's meaning. When inner and outer align, reality mirrors your psyche. That's the moment your unconscious becomes your ally. You no longer chase, you allow. You no longer perform, you express. You no longer beg life to provide, you partner with it. The shadow transformed. The poverty complex doesn't disappear. It evolves, it becomes humility, empathy, gratitude. You no longer fear lack, you understand its purpose. It taught you compassion for others and depth within yourself. Now that same energy fuels your growth instead of sabotaging it. The shadow you fought becomes the ally you trust. This is the ultimate Jungian truth. One does not overcome the shadow, one integrates it. You can love money without being possessed by it. You can be rich and kind, powerful and humble, visible and safe. Those are no longer contradictions. They are maturity. The new myth. Every age lives by a myth. The old myth said, to be pure you must be poor. But that myth has expired. The new myth of the one Jung foresaw and says, to be whole you must unite spirit and matter. You must see money not as sin but as symbol, not as greed but as growth. This is the age of integration, where the external and internal worlds merge, where the spiritual and material no longer fight. And you who understand this are part of that new consciousness rising. The world doesn't need more people chasing wealth. It needs people who are conscious while having it, because consciousness with abundance creates impact. Unconsciousness with abundance creates destruction. That's why your awakening matters, not just for you, but for the collective. Every time you heal your relationship with money, you heal a fragment of humanity's split soul. The final alchemy. So what does it mean to be rich truly? Not in possessions, but in perception. It means you can look at what you once feared and say, thank you. It means you can hold both emptiness and fullness without panic. It means the voice that once said you can't now whispers, you already are. The final alchemy is gratitude. Not as performance, but as presence. Gratitude unites opposites. It says yes to what is, and in doing so attracts what could be. And in that state, you realize something breathtaking. You were never broke. You were just divided. Now you are whole, and wholeness is wealth, so why does your mind keep you broke? Because it was trained to protect you from your own light. But once you see that, once you understand that your poverty was love disguised as fear, the illusion ends. You stop surviving. You start creating. You start living from abundance instead of chasing it. And that's the Jungian revolution. Not getting rich, but getting real. Not escaping darkness, but seeing that the gold was in the darkness all along. Why your mind keeps you broke, and what Carl Jung discovered about it. The treasure you seek isn't in the world. It's in the part of you you've been avoiding. The moment you turn toward it, everything you feared losing begins to return. Not as need, but as freedom.